we need to talk a little bit about Joe Biden last week. Why? Because it really has something to say about the state of the nation. Because we saw a series of stories over the weekend that had to do with race in America. And we should all be able to agree. I've always been sort of puzzled by the notion that we can't all agree on the basics here. Here are the basics. The basics here, most Americans are good-hearted and not racist. Okay? Also, there are some racists. And there are people who are also just giant jackasses who do things that appear to be racist, but may not actually be racist. They might just be jackasses. Right? These all seem like fairly commonsensical things. Also, if you're going to blame an institution for being racist, you should be able to cite the rules of the institution that discriminate against somebody. Also, if somebody within an institution acts outside the scope of authority and does something racist and or bad, that person should lose their job. All of these things I think we should all be able to agree on, because this is just called basic human decency at this point. Well, all of this has broken freshly into public view because Joe Biden last week decided to invoke the race issue once more. And this ties into a broader discussion about race in America. And that is putting all the commonsensical stuff aside, putting aside the ability of all of us to agree on most of the things that I just said. The basic idea here is that America is at root racist, that most Americans are not, in fact, good-hearted, that deep inside the heart of most Americans is an unspoken racism, is a bias against Black Americans, and that every story that demonstrates bias is an indicator of the great evil that is America, and every story that indicates non-bias is an outlier. Right? What you see as the common and what you see as the outlier is almost flipped in this particular view of America. Okay, so as you'll recall, last week when we left our story before you had a Memorial Day weekend, Joe Biden had gotten himself in trouble. Why? Well, he went on a show called The Breakfast Club. He was talking to a host called Charlemagne the God, and the vice president and the presidential frontrunner, Joe Biden, he said that you're not Black if you support President Trump, or even if you have to think about whether to support President Trump.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't Black.
Okay, now that got him in all sorts of trouble, at least for a brief moment in time. And then everybody moved on with their lives because Democrats decided this was not, in fact, a bad thing to say. In fact, what Biden said, it may have been kind of rough, but the reality is that what he was saying was basically good. It was basically okay. So you got two different angles here. One was that this was not a big deal. We should stop talking about Biden's gap. So here's a montage of Democrats over the weekend basically suggesting there's nothing to see here, that when Joe Biden suggests that if you're a Black Republican, you're not actually Black, that's not a big deal. Here's a giant montage of people ranging from Val Demings to other characters on CNN talking about the non-story that is Joe Biden's comment here.
The president shouldn't have said it. He apologized for it. But I really think the gall and the nerve of President Trump.
I believe that Joe Biden was incorrect in saying the statement, you ain't Black. But I also believe that his apology was sufficient.
That apology was given swiftly. He was saying, I'm sorry, I was being too cavalier. I apologize.
To his credit, Joe Biden recognized within minutes that he had gotten carried away.
I think he has apologized, and he should have apologized. It was like, one of those jokes that just falls flat.
Okay, so but people were playing this as a joke. It was no big deal. Jonathan Capehart at the Washington Post today says that it's a joke. That was Jay Johnson saying it's a joke, and Michelle Sandor saying that it's a joke. Everybody basically saying it's a joke. Now, when Trump tells a joke, it's not a joke. When Joe Biden doesn't tell a joke, it is a joke, is sort of the way this works. But underlying a lot of this is the basic perception in radical left circles and among many of the intelligentsia in the mainstream media that basically Joe Biden was right. When Joe Biden says you're not legitimately Black unless you vote for a Democrat, that he is basically correct. And I think that this viewpoint is worth exploring because I do think that it animates a lot of our politics today. The attempt to see all of politics in terms of racial verity. Let's look at this perspective. So there are a couple of people who just said the quiet part out loud. And the quiet part is that Joe Biden is actually right. That when Joe Biden says that Black people who don't vote for him are not Black, that he's actually right. Okay, so Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is one of the leaders of the 1619 Project, just won the Pulitzer Prize for an essay that had some good parts, but was horribly fact-checked and just told open lies about the state of America and about the history of America. She tweeted out, there is a difference between being politically Black and being racially Black. I'm not defending anyone, but we all know this and should stop pretending that we don't. And people responded to her and they said, well, I'm Black and I'm a Republican, so what are you talking about? And she said, well, if you don't know, I won't tell you, which is always the mark of somebody who has a lot of faith in their own in their own statements here. She ended up deleting this tweet because, of course, it was pretty humiliating to the New York Times that there's a difference between being politically black and being racially black. Jamel Hill, who used to be on ESPN, now I believe she is with The Ringer, she tweeted out the issue wasn't what Joe Biden said because it was accurate. The issue is that it came from Biden. It was also clearly a joke that didn't land. I'm wondering where all this outrage was yesterday when the all-president declared his public devotion to a Nazi sympathizer. Okay. So anyway, that's Jamel Hill. Fairly typical. The issue wasn't what Joe Biden said because it was accurate. So I want to actually take this view seriously because I think that this view is worth taking seriously considering so much of it dominates our public debate. So I think that there are a few things that we need to consider. One is race does not decide politics, obviously. The level of melanin in your skin does not determine whether you are a Democrat or Republican. It is also true that you could make the argument that certain policies are better for black Americans and certain policies are worse for black Americans. And you could do this about any group. You can say certain policies are better for gay Americans, certain policies are worse for gay Americans. But how people decide on which values they perceive to be important in politics really does not have to be decided by race. So, for example, let's say that there's a policy that you think is good for black Americans, like affirmative action, but you also believe that this comes along with a lot of Democratic baggage that you don't agree with. And so you vote Republican instead, even if you agree with affirmative action. Or let's say that you think that affirmative action may be good for a subset of black Americans, but it is not generally good for black Americans or good for America more broadly, right? These are all calculations you can make. So the basic idea that if you are black and not a Democrat, that you are not black is, of course, incredibly silly, right? Clarence Thomas is presumably Republican. The man grew up the grandson of a sharecropper after he didn't know who his father was. Thomas Sowell grew up extraordinarily poor, had lived in a segregated area. And there are plenty of black Republicans who have been fully black, right? That statement is silly. But there is a sense in which you could perceive that voting for a particular party would call your self-perception of race into question. Okay, the only way this would work is not based on differential value assessments of politics. It would be when you are under existential threat. And this explains why so much of Democratic rhetoric, why so much of wild leftist rhetoric is about the idea that voting is not about prioritization of values or costs and benefits of particular policies. It's about survival. Because the truth is that for black Americans, for a long time, voting was about survival. If you were a black American and you were voting in favor of Democrats who were keeping you segregated in 1956 Alabama, right, there's a good case to be made that you are not thinking about your own race properly, right? And that would be true of any race. If you're a race that is under the threat of extermination, the threat of extinction, the threat of open discrimination, not covert, not implied, open discrimination. If you voted for somebody who said black people are inferior, right? It wasn't like there was another, and it wasn't like there were no other choices or something. Okay, then you could see somebody like Nicole Hannah-Jones saying, okay, well, you're not being politically black, meaning your group is under actual threat, and therefore you have to vote like your group is under actual threat. The problem is that in America right now, black Americans are not under actual threat from a political group. Now, that does not mean that there aren't individual instances of racism. And one of the things that we need to go back to the commonsensical view of is that we all have the ability to call out instances of racism when we see them. So, for example, over the weekend, there was a woman who trended on Twitter because a tape came out of her calling the police on a black man. Okay, this video was put out by a person named Melody Cooper. Cooper tweeted, okay, when Karens take a walk with their dogs off leash in the famous Bramble in New York Central Park, where it is clearly posted on signs that dogs must be leashed at all times, and someone like my brother, an avid birder, politely asks her to put her dog on the leash, then she calls the cops. So here is the video of this woman. And this can fairly be said to be racist. I mean, what she is doing here seems to be a pretty obvious instance of racism. So this black man says to her, put your dog on the leash, according to him. And then she basically threatens to call the cops. And not only does she threaten to call the cops, what's amazing about this is she is imputing to the police her own level of racism. Because she says, I'm going to call the cops and I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening my life. Right? Assuming, presumably, that the police, being brutal, vicious racists at the NYPD, are going to arrive and immediately just shoot the black guy, which, of course, there's no evidence of. So here is a little bit of the video. This is a racist incident. This is a woman being a racist, even if she probably doesn't even perceive herself as a racist because she's probably a good Upper West Side liberal. But this is about as racist as it gets. Here she is.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to me.
And I'm taking pictures and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. my truck. I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
Okay, and she's getting hysterical, and meanwhile, she's collaring the dog. By the way, the dog ended up being taken away from her by the shelter that saw this video because she's grabbing the dog without the leash. She's grabbing it by the collar to subdue it. When the police arrived, only the woman remained on the scene, according to the police. Melody and Christian Cooper did not return messages seeking comment on Monday night. So Christian Cooper is the name of the man. He put out an account, and he explained that basically she was making a false report to the police. So according to the New York Daily News, on Monday night, a firm for which the woman is believed to have worked, Franklin Templeton, tweeted a statement she'd been placed on administrative leave while they investigated the incident. The dog rescue organization in which she was involved, Abandoned Angels Cocker Spaniel, said on its Facebook page she had voluntarily surrendered the rescue pup. She apparently has now apologized for the situation. Right? According again to the New York Daily News, she says, "I sincerely and humbly apologize to anyone who saw this, especially to that man. His family was unacceptable. I humbly and fully apologize to everyone who's seen that video, everyone that's been offended, everyone who thinks of me in a lower light. I understand why they do. I've come to realize, especially today, that I think of the police as a protection agency, and unfortunately, this has caused me to realize there's so many people in this country that don't have that luxury." She said that her entire life is being destroyed right now because she's put on administrative leave. She said, "I'm not a racist. I did not mean to harm that man in any way." The NYPD First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker told WPIX 11 Tuesday the department isn't looking to charge the dog owner, so we're not going to prosecute that. We have bigger fish to fry. The DA would not prosecute. It's not even clear it would be actionable. It's hard to understand why she did what she did. The fact she invoked race is disturbing. She's got a dog. The sign says the dog must be leash. And in effect, she was the problem. So again, basically, he requested, according to Melody Cooper, that she leash her dog, and apparently she went nuts on him, and then he started videotaping her to document the exchange. Again, the part of this that seems racist is that she keeps saying that he's an African-American man, and she's going to call on the cops to take care of this African-American man, seems to sort of be the implication. Now, do I think that this woman should be doxxed online? No, I don't. I think that we can all see the racism. I think that she is going to be ostracized from her social circles. I don't think it's necessary for everybody online to pile on to demonstrate their virtue signaling. But again, this is an example of a fairly well-documented racist incident, and everybody basically agrees, right? Because when things are well-documented, everybody basically agrees. I'll give you another example. There's a story from the Associated Press today. A black man has died in Minneapolis police custody after video shared online from a bystander showed a white officer kneeling on his neck during an arrest as he pleaded that he couldn't breathe. His death, which occurred Monday night after a struggle with police officers, was under investigation by the FBI and state agents. Minneapolis Police Chief Medaria Arradondo, speaking to reporters on Tuesday morning, was asked about the use of the knee on the man's neck during the arrest. Arradondo said, "We clearly have policies in place regarding placing someone under control." And he said that this will be an investigation that they do internally. Apparently, somebody was called to investigate a report of a forgery at a business, which I didn't even realize was a thing. Like, how do you stop a forgery in progress? Police found a man believed to be in his 40s matching a suspect's description in his car. According to the police, he was ordered to step from the car. After he got out, he physically resisted officers. Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. He was taken by ambulance to the Hennepin County Medical Center. He died a short time later. The name of the officer seen kneeling on his neck was not immediately released. Apparently, he kept saying over and over that he couldn't breathe, and people were saying you need to get off his neck because he can't breathe. Okay, so this is an incident where it's not clear whether it is racist or just police incompetence. Whatever it is, they're going to get to the bottom of it, and someone's probably going to get prosecuted. Okay, so again, this would be an instance where everyone basically agrees, right? So the common sense view of this is that America is overall not a racist place, that when people are racist, and there's video of it, people go nuts on Twitter, on social media. It becomes a national story. That when an incident happens in Minneapolis, there's a full investigation, and there should be. That when there's a cover-up, people are going to lose their jobs. In the Ahmaud Arbery case over in Georgia, I promise you that the original DA is going to be maybe, I mean, if there was corruption, hauled up on charges, and people are being tried for murder. So what does that say about the state of America? Well, it says that Joe Biden is wrong, right? Because black Americans are not under existential threat from Republicans. The argument that Joe Biden was innately making, which is that black Americans have to vote for him because they are under existential threat from Republicans, that's not true. But that's not stopping the media from pushing a continued narrative that is absolutely free of common sense. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.